Like, why aren't you fining this company into fucking submission? Why aren't you putting those people in jail? They're fucking lying. They're Weasley little liars lying to your face, and you're doing nothing. An empire of dying wells. Old oil and gas sites are a climate menace. Meet the company that owns more of America's decaying wells than any other. Outside of hunting season, few people visit the Tri-Valley wildlife area in the rolling hills of southeast Ohio. When a couple of Bloomberg Green reporters showed up on a muggy June morning, the only sounds were bird songs and the whirring of our infrared camera. We set out on foot and soon spotted the first of several rusty natural gas wells scattered across a broad meadow. Their storage tanks, half covered with vines and brush, looked like the forgotten monuments of some long-lost civilization. There are hundreds of thousands of such decrepit oil and gas wells across the US, and for a long time few people paid them much mind. That changed over the past decade as scientists discovered the surprisingly large role they play in the climate crisis. Old wells tend to leak, and raw natural gas consists mostly of methane, which has far more planet-warming power than carbon dioxide. That morning in Ohio, we pointed our camera at busted pipes, rusted joints, and broken valves, and we saw the otherwise invisible greenhouse gas jetting out. A sour smell lingered in the air. To Rusty Hudson, it smells like money. Hudson is the founder and chief executive officer of one of the strangest companies ever to hit the American oil patch, and the reason for our 4-day visit to the Appalachian region. While other oilmen focus on drilling the next gusher, Hudson buys used wells that generate just a trickle or nothing at all. Over the past 4 years, his diversified energy company has amassed about 69,000 wells, eclipsing ExxonMobil Corp. To become the largest well owner in the country. Investors love him. Since listing shares in 2017, Hudson's company has outperformed almost every other US oil and gas stock, swelling his personal stake to more than $30 million. But Diversified's breakneck growth has also alarmed some regulators, landowner groups, and industry insiders, not to mention environmental advocates. State laws require that every well be plugged with cement after it runs dry. Psh, not even a billionaire, I know, right? Being an oil magnate and not even being a millionaire, cringe. Plugged with cement after it runs dry, an expensive and complicated chore. At the rate Diversified is paying dividends to shareholders, some worry there will be nothing left when the bills come due. If a company can't meet its plugging obligations, that burden falls to the state, which means Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia could be stuck with $1 billion mess. The model seems like it's built on abandoning those assets, says Ted Boatner, who studied abandoned wells at the Ohio River Valley Institute, a regional research organization. It looks like a liability bomb that's destined to explode. Hudson says there's no cause for worry. He claims to be able to squeeze more gas out of old wells than other companies can, and keep them going longer. On average, he figures his wells have an additional 50 years in them, which means there's no hurry to start socking away money to plug them. It also means they could be spouting pollution long past 2050, the target date set by President Joe Biden for zeroing out emissions across the economy. State regulators say Diversified hasn't broken any rules by building an empire of dying wells, nor has it violated any restrictions on methane emissions, because none apply. Blessed America! Who gives a shit about, methane emissions, the worst greenhouse gas we can be emitting? God bless freedom. Indeed, state and federal policies, from plugging regulations to tax subsidies, encourage companies to do exactly what Diversified is doing. Keep almost dead assets on life support as long as possible, no matter how much they may damage the planet. Nice photos. We decided to see for ourselves what Hudson's plans might mean for the climate by visiting 44 well sites owned by Diversified. We used state databases to find accessible wells on public land in 3 states. Then we borrowed a $100,000 industry-standard GF320 camera designed to spot methane from its manufacturer, Teledyne FLIR. One of us got trained and certified to use it, and the other operated a handheld gas detector. The results were worrisome. We found methane leaks at most of the places we visited. Some sites showed signs of maintenance in recent months, but others looked more or less abandoned. We saw access roads choked by vegetation, machinery buried under vines and weeds, oil dripping onto the ground, and steel doors rusted off their hinges. That's not to say the wells were unattended. Mud wasps, spiders, mice, snails, and bees made their homes in them, and a porcupine napped under a brine tank. Advocates for natural gas call it a cleaner fossil fuel because it releases about half the carbon dioxide as coal when burned. But there's a catch. Left unburned, natural gas consists mostly of methane, which is much better at trapping heat. Released into the air, a ton of methane will cause at least 80 times more warming over the next 20 years than a ton of carbon dioxide. That's one reason controlling methane is among the cheapest and quickest ways to slow climate change and limit the wildfires, heat waves, rising seas, and droughts it's unleashing. According to one recent estimate, putting a lid on human-caused methane emissions could prevent as much as 1/3 of the warming expected in the next few decades. Damn, you can barely, you can't even tell. Look, like this is the valve, this is the leak under the infrared camera. It's just gushing out. That's fucking terrible. Jesus Christ. Researchers around the world are racing to re-examine the world's energy supply chain, finding where gas is leaking and showing what can be done about it. Scientists are training infrared cameras on methane emissions in Texas oil fields, using satellites to spot them in Turkmenistan, and driving sensor-laden vehicles around city streets in the Netherlands. One problem area they've identified: old wells that produce little or no saleable gas. Only about 3% of gas needs to escape on its journey from wellhead to power plant to make it worse for the planet than coal. Yikes. If a well is producing next to nothing, even a small leak can put it over that threshold. Marginal wells are emitting a very large proportion of the natural gas that they produce, says Amy Townsend Small, an associate professor of environmental science at the University of Cincinnati. Some marginal wells are emitting more natural gas than they produce. Inspecting a diversified natural gas well with a handheld sniffer in West Virginia. Man, yeah. Look at the state of this valve. Townsend Small is co-author of a 2020 study that examined old, low-producing oil and gas wells in Ohio, not far from Tri-Valley. She found their emissions amounted to 21% of gas production. Two other peer-reviewed studies, using different measurement techniques and examining gas wells in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, found loss rates of 9% and 18%. None of the papers identified the well owners. Taken together, the research suggests that gas from old wells in Appalachia is one of the dirtiest components of the US energy system. The damage doesn't end when these wells stop producing. Some continue to leak methane for years if they are not properly plugged. Another paper estimated that as much as 8% of Pennsylvania's human-caused methane emissions was coming from these inactive wells. Our own survey was not scientific, but it provided some hints that problems noted by academic researchers, such as poor maintenance and frequent leaks, were also present at Diversified's operations. At 59% of the sites we visited, emissions were significant enough to cause our detector to sound a safety alarm, indicating that the concentration of methane near the instrument's sensor exceeded 5,000 parts per million. Normal air contains about 2 parts. In a few cases, the source appeared to be a pneumatic controller designed to release gas, but the vast majority were leaks. Methane leaks from the casing of a well called Wilson Coal Land, numbered 89. Diversified Energy later said it fixed the natural gas leak for $300. In a statement to Bloomberg Green, Diversified said that the wells we visited were not representative of our entire portfolio. Of course they said that. They don't... Come on. And that many had been neglected by previous owners and acquired only recently. Some of the leaks we found were tiny, the company added, and all of them are repaired within a few weeks of our inquiries. The cost for quickly fixing these wells, according to Diversified, was less than $90 on average. The company also said it fixed the leak in an underground pipeline in West Virginia after we reported finding a high concentration of gas nearby. Diversified said that it's committed to reducing methane emissions across its operations, and that it's investing in training and equipment to help field personnel find leaks. As for the academic studies showing high emissions rates in the region's old wells, Diversified questioned their accuracy, and said its own wells are better maintained than those of other companies, with staff visiting wells once a month on average. We firmly believe that we are the best custodian of these wells, the company said. No one, including Diversified executives, knows how much methane is actually leaking. Unlike carbon emissions, which are usually a function of intentional fuel use, methane emissions are often inadvertent and intermittent. That makes them almost impossible to measure comprehensively across thousands of locations. Like most oil and gas producers, Diversified estimates emissions using formulas, most of them developed by the US EPA, that assign a theoretical leak rate to each valve, connector, and tank. For 2020, Diversified told investors those numbers added up to 38,000 tons of methane, or less than 1% of its gas production. That's bullshit! Yeah. You know why it's bullshit? They say they're committed to reducing emissions. How do you reduce emissions if you don't know how much you're leaking? They say that they question the accuracy of academic studies. How can they question the accuracy of academic studies when they don't know how much methane is leaking? How can they attack actual academic scientific studies when they themselves can't be arsed to put in the basic work that they're supposed to be putting in? You can't play that rhetorical game against us. Why can't we just have a sensor set up at every gas well? I mean, that would be based, honestly. You have like a GSM card attached to a sensor. Honestly, that would be really, really good. That would be probably the best thing you could do. Set up a system where you have like a portable kit, a low energy portable kit with that can run for like a month off of its battery power, and with a gas sensor. And then they drop by once a month to change the batteries, and it sends an alert online, like through its GSM internet connection to a central server when it detects methane above a certain percentage. That would make a lot of sense, but also that would be very expensive to set up. They have 68,000 wells. They would need 68,000 sensors to set that up. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it if there aren't regulations to force them to do it, basically. Yeah, like you can't use a random formula and then be like, well, we aren't actually leaking that much methane. Look at this magical equation. The formulas don't take into account the age or condition of hardware or whether any efforts were made to fix leaks. Researchers say the actual measurements they get in the field are often wildly different from those predicted by formulas. The study of wells in West Virginia found emissions rates more than 7 times EPA numbers. In February, Diversified told Pennsylvania regulators it had self-inspected 1,412 of its least productive wells in the state and reported that none was leaking gas. We visited 3 of those wells in June. 2 are leaking. What a surprise! Hudson, 52, grew up in the tiny West Virginia river town of Lumberport, where his great-grandfather, grandfather, and father, Rusty Sr., all worked for the local gas company. There were 2 kinds of people. You either worked in coal or you worked in oil and gas. Hudson, who declined to be interviewed for this story, told BBC News last year, recounting his company's origins. It was a generational thing. If your dad and grandfather did it for a living, then you did it. Instead, Hudson became the first in his family to graduate from college, earning an accounting degree and pursuing a finance career out of state. By his early 30s, while working at a bank in Birmingham, Alabama, Hudson turned back to the family business. He borrowed against his house to buy a few old gas wells near where he grew up. Then he bought several more. Within a few years, he quit finance to focus on gas full-time. He set up company headquarters near his home in Birmingham, while working closely with his father in Lumberport. The Fracking Revolution in the early 2000s created opportunity. Companies were pouring money into new drilling techniques to unlock vast amounts of oil and gas from shale fields. When they lost interest in their older, less productive conventional wells, Hudson was there to buy. By 2017, he'd amassed 7,500 wells. That February, he floated the company's shares on AIM, a lightly regulated arm of the London Stock Exchange for small companies. Hudson, who has a square jaw and carefully parted gray hair, started appearing in videos on stock promotion websites, talking up his company's prospects. He unveiled a diversified program called Smarter Well Management, a sort of fountain of youth for decrepit gas wells. Over time, wells tend to bring forth less and less oil and gas until they're finally spent. Hudson said Diversified had developed a system to slow the decline and even resurrect wells that others had left for dead. Sometimes, the most profitable reason to extend the life of an old well is not the extra oil or gas that comes out. It's the delay in the date when a well has to be plugged. When companies tell investors how much they expect to spend on retiring wells, they discount it by how far away that day of reckoning is. On the books, a 50-year timeline makes Hudson's cost almost disappear. Because it plugs so many wells and keeps much of the work in-house, Diversified says it can retire wells for under $25,000, less than industry norms. Thanks to that, and the unusually long time horizon, Diversified often records its plugging liabilities at a fraction of what other companies would. In 2018, the company bought a portfolio of wells from CNX Resources Corporation. CNX had pegged its liability at $197 million, its cleanup liability. Diversified put it at only $14 million. Guys, honestly, I don't know how good their technology is. Maybe it really is that good, but this This shit does not look legit. This shit does not look fucking legit. I struggle to see how you can save that much money on a process that all other companies have to do as well. This may explain why Diversified frequently determines the wells it's buying are worth far more than what it paid. So much so that it books the difference as profit up front. Dude, this is a stock pump and dump scheme. Honestly. Like, unless they're really legit about their reviving the wells thing, this is an actual bullshit pump and dump scheme. I can't consider it credible. In its statement, the company noted its books are reviewed by outside engineers as well as independent auditors at PricewaterhouseCoopers. After going public, Hudson accelerated his buying spree. By last year, he owned about 1 in 5 wells across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Tom Lowry, an oil and gas data analyst in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, remembers the day in 2019 when someone on a phone call mentioned a new company that had more wells than anyone else. I've worked in upstream oil and gas finance and investing since 1998. I had never heard of the company before. Lowry was intrigued. Could Diversified really make money from such geriatric wells? In the blog post last year, he wrote that he analyzed 37,000 Diversified wells and was not optimistic. About half of the ones he looked at were producing less than 15,000 cubic feet a day, he wrote, which in this price environment will barely buy you lunch. Every oilman since the beginning of time has wanted to buy proved producing assets, Lowry says. Why is it that Diversified is the only company that's able to pull this off this decade and be successful with it? Why is one company basically beating the market? It boggles the mind, because he's marketing it. He's actually just marketing the stock. That's what I get from this article. He's marketing the stock. He's not marketing the actual product of the company. American oil executives talk about a food chain in their industry. Big, well-capitalized companies tend to be the ones to drill wells and harvest the first year's production. As output tapers, wells typically change hands a few times, then spend their golden years with a smaller, more financially shaky company. If that company goes broke, there's no money to plug the well. In most states, previous owners are not liable. That helps explain how an industry that created some of the biggest fortunes and most valuable companies has also produced hundreds of thousands of orphaned wells with no owner around to clean them up. Fucking American regulation triggers me so hard, or lack thereof, rather. That helps explain how an industry that created some of the... The Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission estimates the number across the U.S. may be as high as 800,000. In August, the U.S. Senate approved an infrastructure bill that includes $4.7 billion to begin tackling the problem. $4.7 billion of taxpayer money literally subsidizing big oil, because that money should be paid by the gas companies. We're subsidizing them at the tune of $4.7 billion so it stops shitting up the environment. Amazing. And you know what that also means? That also means until there's proper regulation, we're going to need, the US will need to pass this kind of bill every couple years and to plug the wells. This is just a one-time thing. This is part of the infrastructure bill. Insane. Hudson's company represents a new link in the chain. Many of his wells were once owned by the biggest explorers, such as ExxonMobil and Chevron. But rather than scattering among hundreds of small-time operators, the wells are now ending up with him. That's great if Diversified can keep its promises. It also concentrates the risk if something goes wrong. There's a saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Exactly, yeah. In the US, maybe we misheard it and thought it went, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of coke. Yeah, God, you know those executives need their coke, okay? They can't be plugging wells with that money. The Diversified takeovers set off alarms. In 2018, a group of West Virginia landowners sought to block the transfer of 3,865 wells, warning of one of the most, if not the most, widespread environmental and property rights disasters ever in West Virginia. Some regulators were worried too, but they had little leverage. Although well owners must post bonds to cover cleanup costs, the amounts required are so small they're almost meaningless. Regulators have limited powers to block transfers to a new owner. The West Virginia transfers were approved after the state denied the landowner's request for a hearing. In Pennsylvania, Scott Perry, the state's chief oil and gas regulator, told an advisory council in 2019 he had considerable concern that so many wells had been bought by the same company, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. No one broke the law by selling wells to that company, and they did not break the law by buying them, he said at the meeting. But the law is weak. Thousands of wells Diversified bought were producing nothing at all, meaning they were already out of compliance. State laws require non-productive wells to be plugged promptly, so they don't endanger groundwater or catch fire. But enforcing this law is difficult. Regulators worry that if they push companies too hard, it can cause financial distress and reduce the chances that anything will be plugged. Aww. Oh no. Let's not push the companies to, plug the wells. It might hurt them. Oh no. I'm sorry, I'm being overly cynical, but I can't. This is so... Those guys are so fucking full of shit. And I understand it's fucked up because a small company that's handling some old wells, yeah, they don't have the money to plug them. Honestly, it should be the responsibility of the big fish at the top of the food chain that they were talking about. Those guys should put up the bonds to plug the well, and that money should be reserved, put aside. That should be part of the law. I don't know what else to say. You want to dig a well? You gotta put the money aside to plug it. That's kind of all I want to see. If the burden is so high to plug a well, then a company may not be able to do it, and you've defeated the purpose, says Eric Vendel, chief of Ohio's. But you defeat the purpose by not forcing them to plug the well. It doesn't fucking matter at this point. I don't get this argument. They're just lazy. A chief of Ohio's Division of Oil and Gas Resources Management. That concern was especially acute for Diversified, which was juggling an unprecedented number of idle wells in multiple states. Yeah, no shit. You could literally... Guys, this is why I'm saying this is a pump and dump scheme. Literally, you got this company, Diversified Energy. It's got 68,000 wells. A lot of those wells should be being plugged, or you could sue them or push for them being plugged in the name of the regulation. But they're constantly investing. Instead of setting money aside, they are investing in the infrastructure, the technology to extend the well's lifetime, but also buying new wells. They're constantly acquiring new assets. That's literally their business plan. Buying more of those wells, and then squeezing money out of them. Now, once you think about that, you're like, wait. Why is this company the fastest growing stock in oil and gas when literally one regulator call could probably crash the entire company? Like a fucking house of cards. If the regulator decided tomorrow that they have to close their dead wells, will they be able to do that? Will they have the capital to do that? Will they actually have the... This is not a good look for this company, in my opinion. Feels risky, man. Instead, 4 states, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, cut deals that give Diversified about a decade or more to bring roughly 3,000 idle wells into compliance. Okay, never mind. I take it back. They cut a deal. Who gives a shit? 10 more years of methane leaks. 10 more years of shitting up our environment with the worst fucking greenhouse gas we can. Good job, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Thank you so much. Fuck you. I'm sorry, this is making me super doomer, honestly, reading this. I'll chill. Let's pause. Let's get positive again. Let's be happy. If the company revives enough of those wells, it's required to plug only 20 unsalvageable ones a year in each of the 4 states. At that pace, it would take about 750 years for Diversified to plug everything it currently owns in the region. You guys hear that? 750 years? State officials say the company has kept up its end of the bargain so far. Last year, Diversified said it plugged 92 wells, a dozen more than required. The company said its pace beats any other company in Appalachia, an assertion that could not be independently confirmed. It also reported reviving production at hundreds of idle wells, which means it's off the hook from retiring them anytime soon. The states do not have enough inspectors to verify these production claims, so they mostly rely on what Diversified tells them. That also, wow, great. That also means the accounting where they say that they're producing so much oil from these dead wells. Wow, that's really trustworthy when no one can inspect the oil wells. Amazing. That's the exact feeling I had on my last family gathering. Doing something against climate change, but you can't do most extreme form of an action for everyone. We are headed for doom. I know, dude. I can't stand people who don't understand that you need that incremental progress is better than just sitting on your hands and not doing anything. It actually hurts my brain to have that discussion. An incident in Ohio shows the risk of that approach. In 2019, Diversified told state officials it had revived a well in Trumbull County, squeezing a modest amount of gas from a site that had produced nothing the previous year. That put the well back into compliance with state law. But when a state inspector visited the following June, she found the site idle, according to a report she filed. A field employee explained that the well was filled with water and had not produced anything the year before, contradicting what the company had claimed. Diversified said any misreporting was not intentional. Oopsie whoopsie. We made a fucky wucky. Oops. Oh, actually, our well was filled with water. It was not making any gas. We're so sorry. We got it confused. Fucking toothless regulation. Why aren't you fining this company into fucking submission? Why aren't you putting those people in jail? They're fucking lying. They're Weasley little liars lying to your face, and you're doing nothing. I'm getting so triggered. I love you. As president of the West Virginia Royalty Owners Association, Tom Huber represents individuals who share in the profits of oil and gas production on private land. He has every reason to cheer for a company that says it can boost output and keep wells going longer. The more production, the bigger the payments to his members. I want Rusty and Diversified to make a bunch of money and to stay in business 50 years, Huber says. But he fears Diversified won't be able to meet its obligations, leaving a mess for taxpayers to clean up. I hate to sound pessimistic about it, he says, but I'm pessimistic. On the last day of our trip, we met up with Townsend Small in West Virginia. She's one of a growing tribe of methane hunters who ventured to oil fields from Romania to Mexico to document the emissions of the greenhouse gas. She arrived with a carload of gear and cheerful advice on ticks, poison ivy, flat tires, and other hazards of field work. Her goal was to measure the amount of emissions at a few wells, something our equipment could not do. We took Townsend Small to 3 wells we'd identified as leakers. At each, she used a handheld detector to find where gas was escaping. Then she lugged a metal suitcase to the site and opened it, revealing a contraption called an Indico high-flow sampler. It looked like a relic from a 1950s sci-fi movie. It's right here. This is the high-flow sampler. It does look like a sci-fi movie thing. With a chrome control panel and a coil of plastic hoses. She held one hose near the leak after covering the area with plastic sheeting. The machine's display panel showed the concentration of methane in the sample as well as the rate of flow. That allowed her to calculate the amount of methane pouring out. Townsend Small found emissions of 38, 50, and 91 grams an hour at the wells she measured. If those rates continued over the course of a year, the 3 wells would cause the warming equivalent of 134 tons of carbon dioxide. Diversified said those amounts are not inconsistent with the emissions figures it already discloses to investors. Of course they aren't, buddy. Oh no. Of course they aren't inconsistent, buddy. An employee had visited the biggest leaker we measured, Wilson Coal Land number 89, a few days before we showed up and had not noticed any problems, the company said. After our inquiry, Diversified said it sent someone back to make a $300 repair. West Virginia records show number 89 produced only a trickle of saleable gas last year, about 8,000 cubic feet. That means it may have been leaking 6 times what it produced for sale, making its gas a far more potent worming agent than coal. Number 89 was drilled in 1964 and passed through a handful of owners before Diversified bought it last year from a small Colorado company. The gas it produced in 2020 would have been worth about $25 wholesale. It's hard to imagine how a well like that could ever be profitable again. Keeping a well like number 89 going makes more sense after considering the government policies that shape Diversified's business. By not requiring drillers to post cleanup costs up front, state laws incentivize companies to delay plugging for as long as they can. Marginal well owners also collect a federal tax credit, meant to support jobs in the oil and gas industry when prices fall below a certain level. Last year, Diversified reported an $80 million benefit from the subsidy, or about 1/5 of what it got from selling oil and gas. Oh my god! This is so painful to read. You realize earlier when I was talking about what the state setting apart money in the infrastructure bill for plugging wells, that's a way of subsidizing. Literally, the subsidy they're literally also getting subsidized, but with actual subsidies. You realize when they're posting dividends, when they're giving money to their shareholders, literally, with one hand, they're taking money from the government, and with the other hand, they're giving it to shareholders. When you buy stock of this company, you're just literally leeching off the government. This is the actual leeching. This is the actual fucking government leech meme. Not the people who are on welfare. Those kinds of subsidies. Like those kinds of companies getting subsidies. Diversified gas wells in West Virginia. Wilson Coal Land number 89, top row, second from left, so this one, may have been leaking 6 times as much gas as it produced. In West Virginia, there is an additional benefit. Last year, the legislature cut the severance tax on the lowest producing wells in half. Diversified, by far the biggest beneficiary of the cut, told investors it engaged with state regulators in West Virginia to help craft the bill, which also directs revenue towards plugging orphaned wells. So Diversified, the biggest beneficiary of the cut, told investors it engaged with state regulators to help craft the bill. What am I supposed to say? I'm not against business insiders being consulted and being an integral part of policy making. That is actually necessary. I cannot imagine not having that happen. But you can't just listen to their interests and give them what they want. You have to balance out the interests of the people. God fucking damn it. In a state that's been losing coal jobs and was mostly left out of the fracking boom, Hudson is burnishing his company's image as a local success story. Diversified, which now employs more than 1,000 people, recently became the official energy partner of West Virginia University's Mountaineers, and Hudson's name graces a laboratory at Fairmont State University, his alma mater. The state has been good to him, too. Not long after passing the tax break for low-producing wells, it allowed Diversified to experiment with a less expensive process for plugging wells than state regulations require. The $4.7 billion measure working its way through Congress would help states deal with thousands of wells that must be plugged at taxpayer expense because owners disappeared or went belly up. While the spending would reduce methane emissions and create oil-fueled jobs, it does not address the reason these wells were orphaned to begin with. State laws that fail to ensure the industry cleans up its own messes. Although some environmental agencies have begun regulating methane emissions, they've shied away from targeting the kind of older, low-producing properties that Diversified owns. Trade groups argue that the cost of inspection would make these wells unprofitable and could kill local jobs and hurt small businesses. The EPA, which issued a methane regulation for new wells in 2016, is now crafting a rule for older wells but has not said how it will treat low producers. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania exempted low-producing wells when it proposed a statewide methane rule last year, sparing more than 99% of Diversified's holdings in the estate. Okay, so you have regulation. So you finally are passing regulation to control methane emissions in gas wells, but you only target newer wells. Newer wells that are not, where the equipment is, well, newer, hasn't been used up, is not rusting. Can you see the problem? Because I can see a problem there. After years of focusing on his native region, Hudson wants to replicate his strategy elsewhere, amassing old and overlooked wells on the cheap. His current prospect is a patch of Louisiana, Oklahoma, and eastern Texas, where he lined up 4 acquisitions this year. We have a lot of opportunity in front of us. The company was recently promoted to the LSE's main market where the biggest companies trade. In Appalachia, the rust accumulates. State records show that more than 1 in 10 of Hudson's wells there are not producing anything at all. Among them is one known as Phi A36, almost hidden by weeds in a forest in central Pennsylvania. Drilled during World War II, Phi A36 once belonged to Chevron Corporation, but by the time the well stopped producing gas in 1998, it had already been through several different owners. It's no longer even connected to a gathering line. A rusty pipe leading from the wellhead ends in an open shaft, where our camera recorded methane trickling past 2 large bees sheltering inside. Even Diversified acknowledges this well cannot be resurrected, but its deal with Pennsylvania requires it to plug only 20 wells a year, and there are hundreds of wells to retire. Phi A36 will have to wait its turn. This is sad. Honestly, this is so fucking sad. I don't know what to say. I've said what I had to say already. Like, what is there to say? Honestly.